Hello and welcome to another episode of the Liberator Podcast. I am Sam Riley, this is James Silberman and Russell Hunter.
And today we're going to be talking about something very important. We hope that you like this podcast. We hope that you share this podcast. This is one in particular that we would really appreciate you sharing with your pro-life friends or just any random Christian that you know, because Scott Klusendorf, who we're going to be talking about, has recently published on the Gospel Coalition a new article misrepresenting abolitionists and arguing against a straw man version of our view in defense of pro-life incrementalism. I don't know how big that platform is, but it's big enough that this is of great concern for us because we do not have the same size platform as the Gospel Coalition. And Scott Klusendorf knows that. And so he's able to trot out a number of arguments that we don't make, a number of arguments that he makes against us, which we've already answered, but he does so in the knowledge that he's going to reach people that we're simply not going to be able to reach. So please help us out. Please watch these things. If you agree with them, you find merit in them, share them.
Yep. And the reason why Klusendorf in particular is very, very important to respond to when he does stuff like this is because he really is the linchpin of kind of intellectual incrementalism.
Yeah.
So when abolitionist pastors get an abolitionist resolution passed at the SBC annual meeting in Nashville this summer, Scott Klusendorf is there opposing it. And who else is there opposing it? SBC ethics professors and SBC executive committee members who are parroting Scott Klusendorf.
Yeah.
And so Klusendorf really is kind of the ideological leader of kind of anti-abolitionism.
Yeah.
And that may sound like a big, a big statement or whatever, but he just is. Whenever abolitionists are gaining ground in legislatures, in churches, in denominations, he's the one there standing athwart it.
Yeah. And I think it's safe to say that he's basically cemented himself in the position of the leader of a movement against the abolitionist movement. Like if there was going to be a guy who is sort of, setting the the standard arguments that are being parroted, it is Scott Klusendorf. And that is just sad. I mean, Scott Klusendorf, all the disagreements maybe about how to approach abortion from a gospel perspective, how to get into it, like how, different things that we may disagree with him about. Previous to like the last couple of years, I would say that Scott was known as an apologist of the pro-life argument, training people on how to answer pro-choicers, how to defeat pro-choice arguments. He seems progressively more and more committed to training pro-lifers on how to answer abolitionist arguments. To the point where, he's got the articles. I think it's probably making it into his classes even. Yeah. So Scott Klusendorf Life Training Institute is actually working hard to try to keep Christians from unifying together to call for the abolition of abortion as murder.
Yeah. And what's interesting, the good news here, if you read like the first paragraph of this article, this was written this week in the Gospel Coalition, he seems to be getting a little bit more desperate in his argumentation. So he says the knives are out for pro-lifers and not just from pro-abortionists. Abolitionists are also in the... So again, he did this in his town hall article a few months ago. He was saying things like, well, this abolition resolution is going to be used. It's going to be wielded as a, what would he say?
Cudgel.
Wielded as a cudgel against pro-life bills.
Always violent. Yeah. Always like abolitionists are like these cavemen out there just like attacking people.
Yeah. And it's even worse, right? The knives are out, right? Abolitionists have the knives out, and it's very cheap, empty rhetoric. That's very encouraging because that's not someone who's confident in their reasoning, who's confident that they're winning the argument. That's someone who's getting a little bit desperate. So
that's emotionally manipulate.
Right.
Yeah.
Because very encouraging.
Because he knows, as I said earlier, that there's a lot of people that are just going to read this. They don't really know about the complexities of like the abolitionist arguments. They're just taking it on faith. The Gospel Coalition shared this with me. There must be these abolitionists out there that are trying to gut pro-lifers. And they're joining Planned Parenthood. So this is a tactic. This is probably something that he would teach people not to do. Like, argue with people's arguments with what they actually say. Don't just try to demonize them. But there's a lot of demonization that happens in this article. There's a lot of misrepresentation. Yeah. There are some arguments that we want to deal with.
Well, he doesn't even do this to pro-aborts, too. Like, he'll be a lot more fair with them than he'll be with us.
Yeah. Because he knows it's important. Like, if you really want to win the day, against an argument, you rightly, fairly, accurately represent it, and then you answer it. Mm-hmm. He does not do that in this article or in any of the other articles that he's written. Each time he writes something or gives a public lecture or something on this, we try to respond to it because of how important he is, but doesn't seem to matter. Some of the arguments that he makes in this article have already been answered.
Yeah.
But we have to do this because, as we said, he's got a big platform and he is doing everything he can to, think about this, keep things the way they have been.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's a guy who's been fighting abortion for 30, 40 years. I don't know how long he's been in the battle. But he is trying to keep everything the way it is. And the way it is out there is actually changing. And I think that it's bothering him. He sees the writing on the wall and he says, not, what's the merit of the abolitionist arguments. He says, okay, we need to circle the wagons. We need to get everybody together to not be abolitionists.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just jump into it. We're not going to read the whole thing. This is available. We'll put the link to it. We want everyone to read it. Very happy to see that not a number of people on Facebook that I don't know were basically just like, wow, this is bad.
Yeah.
Like, the two big criticisms are always there's no scripture.
Yep.
There's no gospel. There's no Christian worldview. Completely devoid of that. But we want you to be able to read these articles from your own perspective, but we will try to help in that.
So the title of this piece was, and it was for, as Russell said, the Gospel Coalition, Saving Some, Standing for All, a Defense of Pro-Life Incrementalism and the Problem with Abolitionism. Nice note there is that he's identifying us as abolitionists and abolitionism. So
that is good.
That is a positive. I think that he prefaces this in the beginning really negatively to start. We've already talked about that a little bit, kind of using this loaded language, and the Bill Askell thing as well, just kind of painting him in a really negative light. But then the first argument is this bad analogy, and I think that's what Klusendorf that's his bread and butter, the bad analogies that he gets into. So let's just get into that and talk about exactly what the problem with that is. Because I think if you fix it to make it real, to make it actually work, it shows that it's just inaccurate. Like it'll just collapse on itself.
Yeah, because the reality, before we get into his analogy, in the world is there are states where the legislature has before it a bill to abolish abortion or a bill to sort of allow the people in their state the right to bring a civil lawsuit against somebody who performs an abortion after a beating heart is detected by an abortionist. And so in a state where you've got a governor and a legislature choosing between these kinds of bills, they are still choosing the pro-life bill, voting against the abolition bill. That's what's going on in reality right now. But Scott Klusendorf, rather than sort of writing an analogy or dealing with that literally, he could just open the article saying, like, in the state of Texas, they filed a bill to abolish abortion as murder, and they also filed a heartbeat bill, and here's what happened, and here's, he could do it literally, but he doesn't. He creates this wife beating is legal analogy, which I think is new to this article.
Yeah, so he says, imagine a world in which wife beating is legal. 3 governors, Bob, Abraham, and Caleb, all claim to oppose it. Bob has the political power to protect all women, but when the state legislature sends him a bill banning spousal abuse outright, he vetoes it and demands exceptions for men 35 or younger. He appeals to pragmatism. Come on, younger men have difficulty controlling their emotions and may snap if their wives burn supper, fail to discipline the children, or withhold sex. That's reality. The solution is not punitive laws, but state-funded counseling for men.
Yeah, I think that's supposed to be Scott Klusendorf's best guess at what would happen if a bill of total abolition were sent to a pro-life governor.
Yeah.
And that pro-life governor being sort of pro-life in name only, but actually being someone who says, oh, come on, this isn't realistic, and vetoes it.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the pro-lifers that was in the comments. He was agreeing with Scott, but he was saying, we need to go about abolishing abortion in a different way. We need some kind of sex education stuff in the schools, birth control, that kind of thing.
But to be clear on this analogy, this has never happened. Like, this is a thing that has never happened. We've never seen a state send a bill of abolition to a governor and that governor say, no, we need we need something different. That's never happened. But Caleb he's the first, or that's Bob. He's the first one. Abraham, meanwhile, to continue, wins election in a state notorious for wife beating. Previous attempts to ban it outright failed miserably. Abraham is sickened by this lamentable state of affairs and vows to protect all women in law. However, he does not have the votes to do it. Nevertheless, he does what he can. He signs an executive order freeing state employees from abusive spouses. They may leave home and keep their jobs without fear of arrest. 2 years later, his party, which more or less opposes wife beating, picks up a slim majority in the legislature. True, the votes still aren't there to ban the practice, but he keeps pushing. He signs legislation that forbids hitting your wife with blunt instruments. A month later, he secures 2 more bills, one protecting teenage girls from forced marriages to older abusive men, and another that forbids striking any woman older than 50. Those last 2 bills alone will protect an estimated 20,000 women. He signs all 3 incremental bills and vows to do more. I think this is the position that Scott thinks is an accurate description of what pro-life legislators do, pro-life governors do, and what the pro-life movement is calling for.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's actually the opposite of that. So he sets up a case where Abraham wants to abolish it totally and immediately, but the political realities would ever prevent that. And so he only gets an incremental bill. But then he says, yeah, I'll do this, but we're coming back for more.
Yeah, he always vows to do more.
Yeah.
This is a smash mouth incrementalism.
But pro-life governors actually sign bills and say, I know this can't be enforced, but I'm just signing anyway because I said I'd sign all pro-life bills.
Yeah.
Or they'll say something like, yeah, I'm signing this, but it's really just a modest step because you can still murder your baby up to 6 weeks. Greg Abbott literally said that to the media in an interview.
Yeah.
And so this is not how pro-lifers operate in the slightest bit.
Yeah. Kevin Stitt in Oklahoma signed a bill and he said, I'm signing this because I'm proud to sign any pro-life bill as I campaign, but we'll see what the courts allow us to do.
And you'd think if he's trying to really create a useful analogy for the situation that we have now, he would actually take into account the Supreme Court, because he sort of says that's the political reality. The Supreme Court has said from on high that we can't do anything about it. And this whole analogy just leaves it out like it's a matter of votes. We agree that it's a matter of votes in Oklahoma, but we have the votes. Like, we're able to do it now, and he doesn't want to defy the Supreme Court. So the analogy doesn't even address the fundamental contention that we have, and that is that we can defy the Supreme Court, which he disagrees with.
Yeah. Later on, he totally dismisses that and just sides with the judicial supremacy argument. But, yes, the actual reality, so in a state of Oklahoma, we'll take Abraham to Kevin Stitt. Yep. Kevin Stitt is the pro-life governor of a pro-life state where the pro-lifers dominate the Senate and the House, have every vote necessary and the support of the people to totally abolish abortion. There is also a bill calling for the total abolition of abortion that's filed. The situation is the pro-life legislators vote against that bill, keeping it from ever going to the governor's desk, and the abolitionists argue that they ought to have passed it, that they ought to have sent it to his desk, he ought to have signed it and enforced it. The only people arguing against us in the state of Oklahoma are people following Scott Klusendorf, are people who are saying increments. Like, when we're saying we want to do what Jesus commands and we'll get behind, they're saying, give us Barabbas. That's the actual situation. We don't want abolition. We want incrementalism. So just to correct his analogy from the get-go. The third guy is Caleb.
This is the abolitionist, supposedly.
This is what he thinks we're after. Someone else take that away. I read the last one.
Sure. Caleb governs a state where attempts to ban wife beating have similarly failed. The state legislature scrapes together just enough votes to send Caleb identical legislation, identical to the one that was sent to Abraham, so incremental bills, identical legislation to that signed by Abraham. Caleb swiftly vetoes it on the grounds that incremental legislation that regulates when, where, and how men may beat their wives is sinfully motivated and consents to the abuse of those women left unprotected. Which governor did the right thing?
Yeah. Caleb is supposed to be this sort of too pure to do anything good.
Right.
The sort of bad faith argument against abolitionists, that we're only doing this because we want to be pure. He doesn't sign the incremental legislation for the cited reason of it's sinfully motivated. or whatever. Like it regulates when, where, and how. Okay, again, this has never happened. But here's what abolitionists would actually believe. Caleb swiftly vetoes the incremental bill on the grounds that legislation allowing some men to beat their wives and telling them when, where, and how is sinful, and he demands a bill criminalizing it. Caleb vetoes the bill saying that you're allowed to beat your wife within these regulations and demands a bill be sent to his desk saying the only bill he'll sign is a bill criminalizing wife beating.
And he goes up and down the halls of the House and of the whole legislature saying, send me this bill or else I'm not going to sign any of your other stuff. I'm going to block everything until our state stops allowing this wicked practice of people beating their wives.
Yeah.
Right. And when Kevin Stitt did that for constitutional carry a year and a half ago, that was the quickest. I don't know if there's been a quicker passed bill than that one back in 2020, right? He went up and down the halls. He said, I want this bill. I want it to be the first bill I sign as governor. Send this bill to me. Yeah. And guess what? It was there like that.
Yeah. Now, he could also say, I'm vetoing this bill that's legalizing some wife beating, and I'm just going to enact total criminalization of wife beating on account of wife beating is already in violation of our state's constitution and the United States Constitution.
Yeah.
I'm going to uphold the law. Why are you sending me this bill saying that it's okay to beat wives?
Yeah.
That's what we are actually asking governors to do.
And when you have enough governors doing that and enough pro-life thought leaders doing that and enough just general people with influence calling for the immediate abolition of an evil is when you're going to see massive ground be gained against evils, in this case wife beating, in the real case against abortion.
Yeah.
But as long as you have people like Klusendorf rallying the church against the people who are trying to rally everyone around total and immediate justice, we're going to have injustice.
And we're willing to admit some of the, like that Caleb is doing the right thing when he does this, but he needs to do more. But the thing that Klusendorf doesn't do is he doesn't use in his analogy of Abraham, he doesn't say that Abraham killed the bill to abolish abortion.
Yeah.
He leaves that totally out.
Right.
And I think that that's important because we're owning what our position is. Scott, you're not.
Yeah.
Just own it. Say what you're not willing to say here, because Abraham's the guy who's killing the bill and then doing these substitute bills that do not do anything.
Yeah.
That's what he's doing.
Imagine, though, Scott setting it up accurately. Like, not even doing an analogy. So, like, here's the situation in the United States of America right now. There are pro-life states that are doing this. What are they doing? They're killing bills of abolition, demanding incrementalism, and keeping abortion legal by submitting to the Supreme Court. It doesn't sell well. So he does have to misrepresent us in order to win the argument. But in answer to his question, which governor did the right thing? None of the governors in your analogy did the right thing, and none of them are abolitionists. None of them take the perspective that we take. And so in whatever you're arguing against something that is not what we argue.
Yeah.
So, and then, according to abolitionists, he just says only Caleb is right. But the abolitionist claims are flawed and unfairly represent pro-life efforts to limit the evil of abortion.
Yeah.
So it's right there on his mouth. He thinks that we're unfairly. I think the reason that he puts that in there is because he knows that he's unfairly representing us, and so he just puts it in there right at the end of that section.
Yeah, and okay, so then getting into the first sort of point after his analogy, pro-life advocates and abolitionists agree on principle we should protect all unborn humans.
Which is not true.
It's not true. We do not agree on principle. We think that abortion should be criminalized immediately. Anyone involved in an abortion, anyone commissioning an abortion, they should be punished as a murderer. That is not the traditional view that the pro-life movement has espoused.
Yeah.
They've very strongly argued against that. Now, if Scott wants to come out and say, yes, he wants criminalization, he wants women and men who get an abortion to be punished, and he doesn't want them to be exempt, then he can do that. And then in that sense, he would agree with us on principle. Yeah. But until that point, to say that pro-life advocates and abolitionists agree is just not true. Abby Johnson very strongly fought against the abolition bill in Texas. A lot of pro-lifers have done that, and so it's just not true that they have actually.
Right, and that opposition was not based on a practical, how does this work out in reality difference. It was the principle.
Yeah.
Right? The principle of treating preborn children equally under law, the pro-life leaders object to.
Yeah.
And so it's not at all accurate to say that we agree on principle.
Yeah. They say we'll never punish women. They say that.
Yeah, this is the position. I mean, they actually say this is the position of the pro-life movement and has always been the position of the pro-life movement.
Yep.
Just own it. We think the laws against murder should be applied equally to all people. Y'all don't.
Yeah.
And defend your position. Now, the thing is that if you frame it with we should protect all unborn humans, we do agree with the goal, right? Like the pro-life movement wants to protect all unborn humans. We want to protect all unborn humans. We do disagree with how that is accomplished.
Yeah. And
we think you have to criminalize abortion to do that.
Yeah.
They think that you can do it without criminalizing abortion.
Yeah. And I think
that's where you should be arguing.
He gets into that a little bit so this is just the subheading for the argument that he makes, but he says abolitionists insist that pro-life advocates employ a sinful means, incremental legislation, to achieve a good end, saving children. But the abolitionist claim is question-begging, since the debate over incrementalism is precisely about whether compromising legislatively equals compromising morally. And I think it's just, as far as we're question begging, we've spent a lot of time addressing this argument. We spent a whole lot of time saying exactly why we think this is wrong, and we're giving the biblical reasons. You can go check out episode 4 for why we think that it's not just a matter of compromising morally. It doesn't matter what you say your intent to do is. If you do an immoral thing to do it, if you say we're going to write this bill that says if you have a beating heart, you are valuable. If you don't have a beating heart, you are not valuable. That is an immoral thing to do. That is. And if you want to argue that, argue that. But you're not arguing that right here. You're saying that we're begging the question. We're not begging the question. Scott Klusendorf, how do you justify saying that some children are not valuable based on attributes about them because of the stage of development they're at in legislation? How do you justify that?
Yeah, I didn't catch this in the article that I wrote responding to this article that's up on our blog. But that's insane. Like the fact that he's going to say that we're just asserting that it's sinful, but then we're not making the argument behind it. Mm-hmm. That makes me really mad. I have written probably hundreds of thousands of words. We have talked about it at so much length here on the podcast. The guys who wrote the SBC abolition resolution wrote a long, detailed theological argument. For him to assert that we just plainly assert the sinfulness of it and then don't explain the foundations, that is
why it doesn't work.
Yeah, again, that is a straight up lie. That's a straight up lie.
And we're going to get to this at the end, but the reason he's doing this is being disingenuous. Mm-hmm. He knows that a lot of people reading this article will not have read your hundreds of thousands of words. They have not watched our presentations. They have not watched this show. He's getting away with it, and that's a bad faith move. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah,
he does it.
And so a distinction to be made there is if an increment that you're employing to do this is to define someone, a human being, as not human, as subhuman, in order to roll back abortion, we are saying that is immoral, right? Yeah. Because the standard is abolition and they should be protected.
And you are catechizing the culture and everyone who hears about or reads that law to believe something immoral. Mm-hmm. There's some arbitrary characteristic, whether it be a heartbeat, pain capability, whatever it be in that particular law, catechizing them to believe that that's what makes human beings valuable. Yeah. It's wrong and it's immoral.
Yeah. They would say that they're not doing that, but it's literally what they're doing. Yeah. And we see it all the time.
And it's not even that Klusendorf talks about intent. He says we're going after their intent. It's not even that they have the intent of catechizing the culture wrongly. It would depend person to person. I don't want to say the whole movement has bad intent, but what I am saying is that the whole movement supports the bill, that whatever the intent, the bill catechizes. That's what laws do. They are a tutor. So,
and they should be written well, and they should be consistent, and they should be protecting all babies. But if we want to move away from analogies again, there's a law that's being written saying that you can't dismember a baby with forceps, but you can. It says it doesn't say like by implication. It says you can dismember a baby with a high-powered suction vacuum. Yeah, like that is a law that in and of itself shouldn't be written. It's an immoral law. We should not write laws telling people how they can murder. Mm-hmm. Like these are the ways that you're allowed to murder. And so that specific law and that specific situation, we can say is morally wrong. And then we can also say, and because of the way it's written, it's not going to save any babies. Why? Because you can always kill babies with vacuums.
Yeah.
So that's why it doesn't. So we make the arguments about why it doesn't work. It's not just about it being immoral. It is immoral. Immoral laws tend to not work.
Yeah. And if you're following along in the article, we're now on the second argument that he gives here. The abolitionists claim that incrementalism is wrong in principle, raising troubling questions. And I think he just takes a page out of Sean Meyer's book here. But the argument he makes here is, however, if incremental pro-life laws are inherently sinful, which incremental laws currently enforced do abolitionists wish to repeal right now? Sort of assuming that we just want to go in and take away a pro-life law. Like we should be on board with the pro-choicers. That's not what we're saying. We're saying there's one standard and it should be abolition, and we're not going to go in and repeal pro-life laws by themselves. Like we're going to say we're going to replace it with righteous legislation that would abolish abortion entirely, but it has to come off of the books in order for the abolition legislation to replace it.
Yeah.
That has to happen. You cannot have a law that says, you can kill a baby if they're past or if they're before 20 weeks and have it abolished. That doesn't work. It's got to either be superseded or it's got to be repealed.
Yeah.
One of those things.
He's trying to make us look crazy or just heartless or mean or something, just stupid. I don't know what he's trying to do, but he's not doing it accurately. If he's going to do it accurately, if abolitionism is on the table and if repealing previous pro-life regulations is necessary to pass abolition, we do want them repealed. That's what we actually ask for. That's what the bills actually do. And if Scott was being an honest intellectual, that's what he'd say. But instead, he's got this weird sort of thing. I guess our knives are out to go kill pro-life legislation. So of course we're going to repeal anything.
Yeah. And so I think that like this would be the same type of thing as saying abolitionists believe that our murder code is inconsistent. Therefore, they ought to pull out all the murder code out of law and protect nobody. Like that's not what we're saying. We're saying make it consistent, do it this way. Nothing else is going to satisfy us.
Yeah.
We're not saying we're going to go in and pick out all the pro-life stuff without putting in an abolition bill. That's the opposite of what we're saying. We need a consistent law, and pro-life laws have been inconsistent. They continue to be inconsistent. And that's what we need to do away with.
Yeah, that's the right context for repealing pro-life laws.
Yeah.
We're not just running around repealing pro-life laws without abolition being in place.
Yeah, and the idea that we're like logically bound to support that by like our presuppositions is ridiculous. We support just laws. And so we're going to support a bill that says abortion's murder is abolished in the state of Oklahoma.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to support.
And it's his principal bugaboo argument. He says, should we let those children die in exchange for abolitionist purity?
Yeah.
Which is, again, to his readers, if I can make these people out to be basically okay with letting children die, I'll win the argument.
Yeah.
And that's what he's doing. That's what he's decided to do.
Yeah, and James, I think the other part of this, you did a really good job of responding to it in your article, but he brings up IVF and he says that if an abolition bill doesn't get rid of IVF, does that mean you don't support it? How do you tackle that, James? 'Cause I think you did a really good job of that.
Yeah, so abolition bills don't address each kind of abortion. Like it doesn't like specify surgical abortion and abolish surgical abortion, and then specify chemical abortion and abolish that, and then abolish, the practice of getting rid of surplus embryos and dumping them in the trash can. Because in our murder laws currently, you don't have this type of murder. Strangulation comes with this penalty, and shooting someone comes with this penalty, and knifing someone comes with this penalty. You just have murder.
You can't murder people by any means.
Right.
We're not going to list all that. You can murder someone with a piece of paper. You don't have to list every way. But if you pass a law saying you're not allowed to intentionally destroy human life at any stage after the moment of fertilization, that would, passing that, have grave implications for in vitro fertilization.
Yep.
The whole question of whether you list it or not list it is a complete side issue. And he's bringing it up. Again, I think it's because he's just trying to make us look unhinged or crazy.
Trying to poke some holes. Yeah.
Like, or to show that we're inconsistent. We're not.
And the next subheading, pragmatic doesn't always mean evil. We agree with that. That's why we think that the godly thing is the thing that we need to do, because God's in control and He's not going to honor something that's evil.
Yeah. Don't be confused on the words, but we do think that the bill abolishing abortion as murder that applies the laws equally to all people is the most pragmatic thing. Literally, probably the only pragmatic thing. The only thing that will actually do it.
Yeah. The idea that we can effectively move politics and culture by leaving out the gospel, by calling for compromise instead of setting a just standard. Like, that's nuts. There's all the biblical arguments. You can go back and watch episode 4 of our podcast for kind of the biblical arguments. But pragmatically, the idea that, a strategy rooted in secularism and compromise is the most pragmatic, quick and effective way to get rid of a societal evil. That is insanity.
Yeah, they take it for granted. I think that's the position of the world.
Yeah.
And then the worldly Christian thinks I got to leave all of God, God's law, His word, His character. I got to leave it all out to do this because that's the only way to be done. And look, I can prove that it works because look at the past 50 years of pro-life legislation.
And he's written a lot on this point, but let's just get your hot take on this real quick, Russell, because he says Steve Hayes sums it up well. So this is what he thinks is like a good summary of this argument. Abolition can only succeed on the backs of babies it regulates to the grave in the short term.
It relegates.
Yeah, relegates. Sorry.
Yeah, that can be said, and it is actually true about pro-life bills. Like, that's so bizarre how flipped around that is.
Yeah.
Like, a pro-life bill that says we're going to save this many babies, and the only way we can get it passed is if we allow like babies conceived in rape. Like that literally is doing what Steve Hayes or whoever that is says.
Yep.
We're trading the lives of rape conceived babies to save other conceived babies. And for him to turn around and like use it against us is bizarre.
Yeah, and what's crazy about this is it's a thing that I like to say, but these are the people defending the politicians who are keeping abortion legal. And they don't say, oh, those abolitionists, they're responsible for all the babies that will be murdered in the short term. No, if we had our way, abortion would be over. But again, they can't deal with the full context because they lose. If they bring in the full context, they lose.
Yeah.
And so they leave out the full context every single one of these arguments.
The truth is we are probably never, ever, ever going to get to the position where we can successfully kill an incremental bill because we will have abolished abortion already.
Right. As soon as we have enough power to kill incremental bills, we got the power to abolish it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Moving on here, pro-life advocates are not consenting to the killing of unborn humans left unprotected by incremental legislation. Then he gets into the criminal of war analogy. You want to summarize this real quick, James?
Another whack one here.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just go through this analogy. So he says, suppose I'm a prisoner of war captured by a ruthless enemy. My captors take me and hundreds of my men on an 86-mile death march where those falling behind are promptly shot. As the ranking officer, I secure a concession for my captors that allows exhausted soldiers a 20-minute reprieve to recover and get moving before they are shot. My fellow officers join me running up and down the line, saving as many men as we can. As a result, 400 men who fell behind resumed the march, and after the war, returned home to their families. Tragically, 500 others could not resume the march and were shot. And so he's saying, well, if I'm leading all my men in a war, and I know that some of them are going to die, but I'm trying to save as many of my men from dying, in the war as possible, well, that means that's analogous to pro-life incrementalism. I'm saving as many babies as I can, right? The problem is immediatism doesn't apply to war, right? Immediatism is the idea that the culture needs to repent, and repentance can only happen through a call to repentance, which can't be a call to compromise because then you're not actually calling them to repentance. And so the concept of immediatism does not apply to the context where he's trying to drag the conversation through this analogy. So it's really, it's annoying that he would do this. And
he's like a master of bringing up an analogy that doesn't work, doesn't apply. I mean, because in a certain sense, the only way this applies is if you say, let me ask the question, do abolitionists, given that their bills are not being passed, what do they do in the war against abortion? Oh, they go to abortion mills. They try to preach and plead, save lives. We see it almost daily. They get on the internet. They reason with people. They try to persuade people. They drop cards. They wear shirts. They just do everything they can to save as many lives in a culture where abolitionist legislation is not passed. Like, we literally are doing the thing that the guy's doing. We're running around doing this. And at the same time, calling for consistent legislation to abolish abortion. Like it's not even there's nothing here that applies to legislation. Everything here is replying to just daily, day in action. And I think we fit it just fine.
Next subheading here, abolitionists wrongly assume that pro-life advocates have the power to stop abortion, but simply won't.
Yeah, this is so annoying. He always does this. Abolitionists are just standing on a street corner trying to wave a magic wand and make abortion go away. Mm-hmm. Like he actually begins, this is a fantasy, is how he describes the idea that we can abolish abortion immediately. Yeah. And as I guess, I don't know, maybe we'll get to it later. Maybe I guess now's part of the time to get into it. But he believes that the Supreme Court is the law. Mm-hmm. It's not like the Supreme Court has to apply the law in certain cases. No, if they say mass murder is legal, mass murder is legal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And because of that, he calls it given that judicial reality, that reality of the judiciary being completely supreme, no matter how evil what they say is, he thinks it's a fantasy that we can abolish abortion.
He doesn't lay out the different positions on it. I mean, there are different positions. Like some people think that the Supreme Court's rulings are the Constitution. You know, that's what they think. That's not really the way it was set up. There's all sorts of historical arguments, law and policy arguments about checks and balances of different, branches of government that one would go into, and he could go into those and say, I side with the people who say if the Supreme Court says you have to wear pinwheels to shop at Publix, I'd wear pinwheels. That's the way it is. Yeah. Whatever they say. Like if it says it's okay to murder your pastor if you don't like what they preach, it's legal. Like he needs to own this position that he says it's just the judicial reality.
Yeah. And it's important to note here, the thing that gives this position power is guys like Scott Klusendorf. It's the people saying the court has the authority to do this. It doesn't matter what the Constitution says. They've said it. We have to follow it.
Yeah.
Like that is the thing that is giving them the power. And so to say we don't have the political power, well, guess what? The way that you get that political power is you begin to say no more listening to the Supreme Court on this point. Yeah. And I think that's when all of our historical analogies really hit home, because whenever we think about tyranny in the past, where there was just a straight dictator saying you have to do this or you have to do that, that's when it's like, wow, we really have a much better situation here. We've got a constitutional republic where it's written down, it's in law, that is what the law is. And the Supreme Court is off. They're not obeying that. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the past, Christians were being beheaded and killed for doing the thing that was supposedly the legitimate authority. When a tyrant said, don't preach Christ here, that is the legitimate authority in that place. And they were defying it. Here, the Constitution is the legitimate authority, and it is clear to absolutely everybody that the Supreme Court has not interpreted it correctly at all.
Yeah. They're making laws that's unconstitutional. What then is our response supposed to be? Well, it's supposed to be similar to the people who work the Underground Railroad. Mm-hmm. When the Supreme Court said that you can't work the Underground Railroad, you can't help slaves to freedom, you can't. That's illegal. Abolitionists said, I'm going to nullify that law. I don't agree with your court decree. I don't agree with the Federal Fugitive Slave Act. This is unjust, it's wrong. Yeah, or at that time, the Constitution. And so, yes, there are times and places where you do have to stand up against the judicial reality or the laws. This seems to be completely off the table with him. He actually brings it up later again, that would be secession.
Yeah.
But instead of arguing, against what we actually believe, I think he, again, is just trying to paint it as we're out of touch.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're out of touch.
I think, what Sam says is a really important point. Just to reiterate, it is a self-fulfilling prophecy that you can't defy the Supreme Court. For as long as you've got people like Scott Klusendorf and the influential people saying you can't defy the Supreme Court, you can't defy the Supreme Court. But as soon as you replace people who say stuff like what Klusendorf says with people who say you can defy the Supreme Court, and there's enough people on board with that, guess what? Now you can defy the Supreme Court. Yeah. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and the sooner the abolitionists replace the pro-lifers like Klusendorf, the sooner the court will be defied whenever it does evil things like this. So
we've seen this on the other side of the worldview. If they say you're not allowed to have marijuana, it's a criminal act, you say, actually, we're going to have marijuana. This just functionally, from a pragmatic point of view, that's what we ought to be doing. oppose evil.
That's the actual war of attrition right there. Because it's like, you
And
think about
for
like,
as long as it takes.
yeah, you think about like prohibition. Like the reason that failed ultimately was because people were making alcohol and drinking it, and they weren't stopping.
Yeah, they're
You
just
know,
like,
so it's like-
yourselves can't do this, so we're just going to do this.
Yeah.
And then eventually the government's like, okay, you're going to do it. And the question is should we do that for the babies? Scott's answer is no. I mean, I don't think that's unfair. It's like, we should not do this for the babies for as long as it takes.
Yep. And this next argument, I really am kind of shocked that this made it into it. So argument 6, we are all incrementalists, including abolitionists. And this is the abolitionists are regional incrementalists argument. Yeah. It basically says that because we want to do this state by state, we are doing this incrementally. And just reading the definition, here, I'll do it right now. Reading the definition of what incrementalism is, no one would make this argument. It's really simple. Look up the definition of incrementalism. Here we go. And it says, so just look up incrementalism. It'll be very clear after this. A policy or advocacy of a policy of political or social change by degrees, gradualism, right? We're not doing anything by degrees when we as a state say no more abortion. Yeah. We're not saying let's go here and then here and then here and then we'll abolish it. We're saying it's over in this state where we have jurisdiction. Done.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. Yeah. And I don't know why anyone would put that argument.
Well, I think that he either doesn't understand it and is dumb, or he understands it and he thinks my readers don't. I'm going to say that every one of these points because I think he's being disingenuous. Yep. But because we could abolish abortion in the United States and be like, oh, that's incrementalism because you didn't abolish it in China. We could abolish it in the entire world. And you could say, well, but there could be abortions on Alpha Centauri. Yeah. You're an incrementalist. It's like, no, dude, we don't mean that you can't do it from place to place immediately.
Yeah.
It's infuriating that he's not willing to be honest.
And this is an important point because a lot of abolitionists out there will say things like, oh, yeah, we're for some increments. But like, according to this definition, we're not really for any increments. We're saying we don't want this to be in degrees. We don't want this to be gradualism. We want this to be done now. And so people will say, well, there's unrighteous increments and there's righteous increments. I don't think we should use that kind of rhetoric.
We should just say straight up,
that's not what the definition of incrementalism is. Right. That's not what anyone means when they talk about incrementalism in politics. Yeah. What we mean by that is we're not going to do it in degrees. We're not going to have half steps on the way to abolition.
Yeah. But we're not talking about overnightism or things taking time. Like we may 1 year file a bill and then it just ignored. The next year it's not ignored, it goes to committee. The next year it goes to committee and gets voted down. The following year it goes to committee, it gets voted through. Like that is us going and fighting as long as it takes. When somebody who's so like blasted dumb about this goes, well, that's incrementalism. I'm like, you need to just look at the basic thing and be honest, deal with this honestly, argue for your position without lying about ours.
Yeah. Another important point here, or an easy way of summing up the point, is that abolishing abortion, whether it be locally or nationally or worldwide, is a righteous thing to do. You are writing a law that is obedient to God and His Word. To regulate abortion, whether it be locally or statewide or nationwide or worldwide, is immoral. It is inconsistent with God's Word. Yeah. And so that's the heart of the thing.
And is not going to bear fruit.
Yeah.
It's also not going to win. It's not going to do it.
It's also strategically dumb. Yeah.
Strategically dumb, and we've got 50 years proving that it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But yeah, when he says we can't help but function incrementally when confronting evil, well, we agree with that in a sense. And there is a sense, if we take what he's meaning by incrementally,
if we're playing word games,
it takes time. And someone says, well, how do you think this goes? I say, I think one state does it. I think they stand up. Other states go, oh, let's do it too. Multiple states do it. Then it becomes a federal question. And eventually the United States of America abolishes abortion, correcting all the unjust laws. That, if you want to call that incrementalism, which I don't think you should call that the march towards total abolition in the United States of America. I don't think it's going to happen overnight or with the waving of a wand. I think it does happen in one state before it happens in two states. That's not incrementalism. That's immediatism in one state.
Yeah. And I think that we get sort of the end of the article. He starts asking his "and then what" question, and that's taken right from Van Maren and they think that this is the silver bullet. We just ask them, and then what? And then it's over.
And then we all go home and stop doing the Liberator Podcast. We've been destroyed.
Yeah. And the truth is about this is a lot of things could happen, and in the providence of God, He might test our resolve by bringing a lot of persecution on Oklahoma. And we would say to that, bring it to us and let us be faithful. God, help us be faithful. We want to be opposing this no matter what comes our way. But Klusendorf doesn't even want to start that. He doesn't want to have a situation where a faithful state is saying, we're not going to do this anymore, and we don't care what you send our way. He wants us to just continue to go along to get along until the Supreme Court will just let us do it. And that's not how history works. That has never been the way grave injustices have typically ended.
Yep.
It usually has been someone saying, we're not going to do it anymore, and a greater authority saying, okay, we'll let you do it, or we're going to bring a whole bunch of persecution, and eventually you're going to weather the storm, and it's going to be over.
Yeah, power concedes nothing without a demand. Mm-hmm. That demand has to be made. You have to actually bow up and say, this is just, do this.
Yeah.
Or you're not going to make any progress.
Now, we can turn it around and say, then what to them? Like, if you're not going to support bills abolishing abortion as murder, if you're not going to apply the laws against murder equally to all people, and you're going to oppose those, then what do you want to do?
Yeah.
What you've been doing for another 5 decades?
We just know very, very tangibly what the answer is there because it's continued. You know, it's happened for year after year after year after year. We know what the and then what is if the pro-lifers have their way. So that's why we've got to reject what they're doing and go the opposite way. That's a big argument for abolition because we know what there and then what is.
Yeah. It's not our principal argument. You know, it's not like a sort of like, well, why not give us a try sort of argument. But I mean, I know we do get some people becoming abolitionists. I mean, I've talked to some guys that have been like, man, I have supported this and this and this, and all these pro-life organizations have told me we're winning. And after 40 years of hearing you're winning, or this is the next big thing, or with the appointment of this Supreme Court justice, this is going to be it. Like, I am just worn out on that. That doesn't work with me. Well, okay, that's a practical reason to try out abolitionism. I think that our arguments are rational, reasonable, and biblical. But yeah, we do gain people because pro-life stuff has not panned out. But I love how he's like, pro-lifers are hopeful the Supreme Court will strike a fatal blow. Like, he says, well, we want to do the same thing we've always done. We're hoping that the Supreme Court will come through for us.
Yeah.
But if they don't, we'll just hope again later.
Yeah, and the really scary thing with a lot of the reasoning that pro-lifers will use, and I think Klusendorf even gets into this here, is this is like their sacred cow, abortion is. And what that and they're not going to let it happen. They're not going to let nullification happen. And essentially what that is, if you were really honest with what you're saying there, is they want abortion more than you don't want it. Yeah. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Like if you actually think that abortion is a Holocaust, and you're spending all your time convincing them of that, it doesn't matter what your opposition thinks about it.
Yeah.
You just do it. But they actually think, I think it is the case that like actually pro-choicers want abortion more than pro-lifers.
Oh, yeah.
They've already said that they will defy an abolition bill if abortion's ever illegal. There's all these attorney generals and all these district attorneys who said, nope, we will not comply.
Oh yeah. If the Supreme Court criminalized abortion, pro-choicers would secede.
Yeah,
they would. California and New York would they would leave.
Yeah,
like they are willing to do for abortion what pro-lifers are not willing to do for their preborn neighbors,
and that's why we lose.
And that's why we lose. And that is what we're trying to change.
Yeah,
you know, it's sad, but yeah, totally agree.
Yeah,
totally agree. No, these pro-lifers have been discipled by people like Scott Klusendorf to almost think of. Like, I'm not for secession to fight abortion, but to think of that as crazy. Like, he's able just to say, well, that would be secession. Like, if you were ever going to secede for anything,
it would be this.
It'd be to protect preborn humans.
And I think they have it programmed into their thinking where when they see that from pro-choicers and pro-aborts, they think, this is unruly, this is unlawful, this is bad. But it actually isn't the nullification or any of the other things that they're doing that's bad. It's the lawlessness, the idea that allowing abortion,
what they're doing
that right there is the anarchy. That right there is the lawlessness, not the means that they're doing to secure that. Yeah. And so us saying, let's nullify so that babies aren't murdered and lawlessness doesn't reign in this land, That's the lawful thing.
Yeah.
But they're so twisted up on their thinking in that they're not even recognizing that abolition and nullification and even secession in some cases are legitimate things if a Holocaust is happening.
Let's nullify in Oklahoma to start a trend of nullifying in other states to lead to the total abolition of abortion in the United States of America. Let's do that. Let's do it now.
Yeah.
And we start to do it, and pro-lifers are the ones saying, no, we can't do that. It has to be by increments or whatever. But
and just to be clear too, it's like secession, we're not saying that. Let's let them secede. Let's let the liberal states secede.
Yeah.
But let's ignore them on this. It doesn't matter what they do.
Yeah. A little side historical lesson here. The South seceded to practice slavery because they saw that the North had elected someone who was going to do something about it, and the fear of that.
Yeah.
And also, this is cited in a lot of the letters and material being published in the South. They were mad that Northern abolitionists were not being punished for helping runaway slaves. And they were like, well, we're seceding. So we do think that that's how it's going to happen.
Yeah,
I do.
And I wrote about this in the article that's up on the Free the States blog.
So good.
If you haven't read that, you should go back and read it. But yeah, Jefferson Davis in his U.S. Senate farewell address, saying we're leaving the Union. This is my last speech before the United States Congress. He says the North has allowed the nullification of their duties to return escaped slaves. So the abolitionists and the Northerners are practicing nullification, and we hate that nullification so much that we're leaving.
Yeah, and that's what they say. The federal government has allowed Christians in various states to criminalize abortion, so we're gone. Yeah. That's how that's going to go.
Yep.
And it's how it should go. And if that's the only way to criminalize abortion in America, we should do it.
Yep.
And Scott Klusendorf is discipling people through the Gospel Coalition, through Desiring God,
Town
Hall,
Yep.
through these places. He's telling people that this is not something that you, Christian, should do.
Yeah.
This is soul destroying stuff.
You make your own political realities, unfortunately, Scott Klusendorf, because you go and you say that abortion's a sacred cow for them, and it's akin to secession for us to suggest otherwise as far as nullification goes. But it stops being all of that stuff when you just come on board and you start telling your people this is the righteous thing to do. Like, just stop.
Yeah.
Actually advocate the right thing. It's so bonkers that you recognize how crazy the pro-aborts are for abortion, and then you advocate moderation for those who oppose it. Because that's what you're doing.
Yep.
Crazy.
Troops will be sent in to enforce federal law. Abortion clinics will remain open. Then what? I mean, he's just conceded. He's basically saying, we will never shut down abortion clinics. All we can do is regulate this and save as many lives as possible. We will never do this. We will never abolish slavery. We will never stop the Holocaust. We will, we just can't. So let's do what we can do. That is his guiding drive in life. And we're just saying, what if the church, what if just the people of God in the United States of America unified together and stood up as though babies were being murdered in the thousands every day?
Yeah.
Okay, we should read his final paragraph. We should read it in full because I think there are things here that are completely new in Scott Klusendorf. Pro-lifers and abolitionists share two things in common. I love it that we're separate and we're sharing a thing in common. That's important because we are not part of the pro-life movement and dysfunctional or something.
Yep.
Pro-lifers and abolitionists share two things in common. First, they agree in principle that every unborn human deserves the protection of law, and we must not rest until that happens. I tend to agree that actually holds true for most pro-life people. And the debate really is about how we do that. Second, both are forced to function incrementally. In the way he's using the word incrementally, that this is going to take time and that we're going to have to do it where we can do it.
Yep.
We agree. Given that shared reality, there's room for candid discussions about tactics and strategies. If abolitionists want to join that conversation in good faith, they are welcome. I love this, but I don't think he means it. This whole article is just a litany of bad faith arguments in hopes of replacing or being in the place of candid discussions.
Yeah.
I think this guy is trying to get people not to listen to us. I think he's wanting to take the whole thing off the table for discussion. And previously, though, he's basically said we're bad faith actors. Don't even recognize them.
Yeah.
Like, don't even recognize them. But he's had to. He's been forced because of the growth and spread of abolitionism to try to discuss what we believe. And he is currently choosing to strawman, misrepresent, malign, and make accusations in the place of true, candid discussions. But we would love to have real, honest, candid, forthwith discussions with Scott Klusendorf and anyone from the pro-life movement along these lines.
It is just, it's casuistry on this second one. The second, both are forced to function incrementally. No. Like, we've already responded to that.
Yeah, but
you're trying to blur lines, blur distinctions, even while making some of those, like pro-lifers and abolitionists, good. But you're blurring that line, and I think it's just, you're just being deceptive.
Yeah, but if he's saying, like, abolitionists, we are forced in the United States of America to focus on states like Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri. We are, like, if that's what he means by increment, that's the only thing I mean whenever it's like.
I'm saying, like, using that word incrementalism and incremental is just deceptive.
He's playing a word game. He's not using the real definition of incrementalism, just like he doesn't use the real definition of compromise. He changes the meaning of words repeatedly through these articles. And that's been his tactic in the last couple of them here.
Yeah. So. People should not follow him as a thinker any longer. They should not. This is not a guy who's going to teach you how to argue. Like, if you want to argue against anyone, good guys or bad guys, you take what they believe, state it accurately, and argue against it. And we would love to do that with Scott Klusendorf, but he is basically just throwing every little trick and debating principle, schemey thing in the book our way. So and there's a lot of projection here. That's the last thing I want to say, that there's a lot of his accusation that we don't do anything in good faith. I mean, why does he think that we are like that? I think because he's like that. And he knows he's like that. Instead of admitting it, confessing it, and moving on and trying to do right, he's just going to accuse us of doing the things that he does do and has long been doing.
Yeah, that is the article. It's crazy to me that so many people found it convincing, because there was a lot of people that I knew that they were like, wow, this is a good article. It's like, have you read anything that we put out? Like, anything? Because that's not good argumentation. But yeah,
but that's why he's doing what he's doing.
Yeah,
ultimately. I mean, I think he knows, like, the whole, like, dear pro-lifer, as you read this, I'm going to remind you, your pride is hurt.
Yeah,
these people say you're bad. You're with me.
You should be vindicated on this.
Yeah, and I'm your man.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for joining us on this episode of the Liberator Podcast.
And on this month of the Liberator Podcast, of which this is the final episode.
Oh, right. So we've got an art giveaway to do.
Indeed.
Yeah.
What art are we giving away this month, Russell?
I'll grab it.
Oh, boy. So for those who don't know, if you haven't been following us for very long, we do a monthly art giveaway where one of Russell's pen and ink art drawings is given away to a faithful supporter of Free the States who gives $25 a month or more, or a large one-time donation. There's a bunch of people that have done that before that are in there.
I wouldn't be able to draw. I wouldn't be able to do things. James wouldn't be able to write. Sam wouldn't be able to create videos. We wouldn't be able to do what we're doing without supporters who keep our lights on and my pens running with ink. I don't know how that works, but this one, justice brings joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. Love this verse. I think we could probably apply it quite well to pretty much this episode. We are seeking justice. That brings us joy. So I produced this. I don't know what it's going on exactly, but it is a pen and ink drawing. I would love for...
Yep. You have the scan. It'll probably be a shirt or something at some point.
Yeah. So. And, I'll sign it and send it to you, and you can keep it in your possessions until it's worth billions of dollars.
Yeah.
All right.
Hopefully.
Or $10.
All right. We got the mic up there. Hear that crunch? Yeah. Very satisfying.
Who's the winner?
Try to get down to the bottom in case anyone's like, I bet my name's down there and I'm never going to get picked.
Pull a back row Baptist out of there.
Yeah. Here we go.
Bottom of the barrel Baptist.
Paul Mann.
Paul, man, you are the man. And you won this pen and ink drawing. I hope that it could be hanging in your office and start conversations with people about the Word of God. We will send that to you. Thank you very much for watching this episode. Please share it. Please think about these things. Engage people in conversations. And keep on supporting Free the States and the Liberator Podcast, where we are
committed to being as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice. See you next week.